Welcome to Balance and Beyond, the podcast for ambitious women who refuse to accept burnout as the price of success. Here, we're committed to empowering you with the tools and strategies you need to achieve true balance, where your career, relationships, and health all thrive, and where you have the power to define success on your terms. I honor the space you've created for yourself today. So let's take a breath and dive right in. The dynamics of balance in 2024 are changing rapidly. In last week's episode, I spoke about the 5 significant shifts we're seeing. And this week and next, I'm going to do a special 2-part series on 2 of the components that have had the most buzz and I've had the most people contact me about. Today, we're talking about boundaries. Those crazy things that we've never been taught to hold are incredibly detrimental to all areas of our life if we don't know how to hold them, and are crucially more important now than ever. It's a pretty good chance if you're in any way a procrastinator, a perfectionist, a high achiever, a people pleaser, you have a big heart, you struggle to say no, that you have trouble with boundaries. And in particular, if you can't say no, that's a very, very big indicator that you don't know how to put up a boundary, because that's what a boundary is that's what a no is actually enforcing a boundary. This boundaries is something that it's a bit of a hashtag, Instagram hashtag boundaries, but nobody actually knows what they really are. And I believe they've got a bad name, particularly over the last couple of years. So I'm going to help you understand from a very, very different perspective, from a female perspective, from almost this sort of psychotherapy and psychologist background, what is a boundary? So first and foremost, a boundary is where one thing ends and another begins. Very, very simple. A fence is a boundary. A fence is a way of marking my property ends here and another property begins here. The thing is, boundaries are actually designed to help you. Boundaries aren't there to keep other people out. They are for you to understand where it is that you end, and most importantly, another begins. And they are primarily there to help you feel safe in your relationships with other humans. You'd never need boundaries if we lived on a desert island and you just got to enjoy pina coladas and move about your life as it was. But we choose to live in tribes. We choose to live with other humans. And for that reason, it's really important that we learn how to hold these boundaries so that we are protected. I'm going to say that again. Boundaries are here to protect you. And yes, of course, a boundary is there to protect you physically, your material possessions, but we can also boundary our time, our energy, our emotions. And these are things that while we might be able to boundary our body and go, no, you can't touch me in that way, or no, you can't do that, we have no concept about how to boundary our energy, is because we just give it to everybody for no apparent reason. And you can put up these boundaries in all areas of life. So you can put up boundaries with your home life, with family, with friends, at work, in all manner of relationships. But sometimes the toughest boundaries to put in place are actually the ones those we love the most. So those closest to us. And that may be intimate relationships from a partnership perspective, but boundaries with family, particularly parents and siblings, can be really, really tricky. So at the end of this, we'll be giving you some actions to take. And I encourage you, if you struggle with boundaries in those particular areas, that's perhaps not the place to start. Every time you do say no, you are putting in place a boundary. And a key piece around boundaries that I want you to remember, and everybody who works with me has this tattooed across their body when they leave their time with me. And really the concept of a boundary in knowing where I begin and I end and you begin, is that you are not responsible for how another thinks, acts, and behaves. I'm going to say that again because there's a chance you've never heard this before, but you are not responsible for how somebody else thinks, acts, and behaves. That's what a boundary is. And of course, when you hold a boundary, when you put one up, someone's going to have a reaction to that. That's not your fault. That's not your problem. That's not your responsibility. And as women who spend so much of their lives, who are particularly those of us that are very empathic and have huge hearts, we don't like letting people down. We worry about what they'll think. We will worry if will they like us. That immediately there means that you cannot have boundary because you are worried about what they think, which means then you can't enforce this piece for you. When you start to put up boundaries, I can promise you it will improve every relationship in your life across every single metric. I've often heard people say before, boundaries are life. And they literally are the thing that can give you life. They give you more energy. Because what's likely happening at the moment is that you don't know how to set boundaries. What this means is you say yes to everything, which is when you don't know what you actually want to do, versus because you think maybe you should do it, or you feel obligated to do it, or you feel like they should think that you should want to do it. And so then it's probably best if I should want to do it. And then I'm mad at myself because why don't I want to do this thing? See how murky this is and how much energy that we leak in actually trying to manage this part of our lives. When we don't hold these boundaries, we find ourselves full of resentment and anger. And instead of trying to hold a boundary up, what we do is we spend our lives trying to control everything and everyone around us, when simply we could have put up the boundary and said, no, I don't want to bake cupcakes for the school fete. I don't have the time right now, or simply no, instead of saying yes and then feeling resentment and anger and frustration and then taking all of that out on everybody else around you. And in fact, anytime you do feel resentment, that is actually a sign that you've breached your own boundary, because you're angry at someone, but actually you're angry at yourself. And this is where we need to learn to bring ourselves into alignment, and why people pleasers, who are people who usually don't have any boundaries, are inherently untrusted. Yes, if you're a people pleaser, you're saying yes to everything and you're worrying about everybody else because you feel like that's the thing that makes you whole, or you think that's the right thing to do. But in fact, it means that nobody trusts you. Because when you give them an answer, they don't know what you really want. They don't know if you really like it. One of my favorite stories goes back to Julia Roberts in My Best Friend's Wedding. And depending on which guy she was with, she changed the type of eggs that she liked, because she thought that it was better to like the same eggs as him. And it was only towards the end of the movie where she actually came into her own and went on this journey to try all the different types of eggs and to decide which one she actually liked. She gave over her needs to the other person and said, well, I'll like what you like. I like that too. Well, I think I should like what you like. And then this is how we become so absent in our own lives, because we are so looking outside ourselves for approval, validation. Is this what I should be doing? Of course, when your feedback loop, and whether you know you like something, or whether you know you can do something, or whether you give yourselves permission for something, if all of that is happening outside of yourself, of course you have no idea where you end. And so you can't ever hold that boundary. And this is why people pleasers and people say yes to everything have diluted influence, and they have massively diluted energy, and they're exhausted, is because there is this constant crazy energetic feedback loop of, what do I want? I don't know what I want. What should I want? What do they think I should want? What should I do here? Should I say yes to this? What do I think I should say? That means I'm a bad person if I say no. That's the internal dialogue and the energetic dialogue that is probably going on inside your body and your brain. It's nuts. And it's why our signal becomes really blurry, why people listen to us, or they, will say yes to something and they'll go, really? Because while we're saying yes on the inside, we're going, no, 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 I don't really want to do this. So part of the ways that you may already know, I need some boundaries. This begs the question, why are boundaries so hard for women to implement? Why is it so tricky for us to either say no or to say, this is what I'm going to do now? And in order to set those boundaries, I mentioned this is about where I end and you begin. Well, we need to know what our needs are. We need to stop looking outside of ourselves for validation, for proof, and instead actually look to ourselves for permission. Look to ourselves for what we want, for what we need, for what it matters to us, for what is important to us. And we have to put all of that external reflection and mirrors, we've got to put it all down. That is the only way that we are going to find setting boundaries much, much easier. This is not helped by, as women in society, we are culturally programmed not to set boundaries. It's very much modeled through our mothers, through society. And when your child is born, I often say that they put on your chest, and then right with it is a heap of guilt. And following that is, okay, you're now one down the pecking order. And with each child you have, you go further down. This expectation that mothers go last, that they put everybody else's needs ahead of our own. And while that may be true in those early stages, when you have a little human who's attached to you, of course, we end up to an extent, having to prioritize their needs over our own. We need sleep, but the baby needs to be fed. So we don't really have a choice. But we forget at some point we have to reclaim our right to matter. We have to reclaim our right to have needs, to have wants, to have desires, and to give ourselves permission to actually meet them. This is why we have not been taught this. And if we dare communicate our boundaries to anybody, well, then we're labeled as selfish. Well, I'm not going to go and, I'm not going to go do this thing because I'm doing this thing for me. Oh, well, aren't you selfish, or aren't you nice? Well, actually, yes, I'm taking care of myself. And that is something apart from the sort of pink washing of, oh, yeah, go have a massage. There, you'll be fine. We're not allowed to take care of ourselves on this deeper, more meaningful level than we actually need. Many women know they need a break, but taking them to a massage is like slapping a Band-Aid on that. What they actually need is to learn to boundary their energy and to not continually give it away to everybody. One of the pieces I love around boundaries, and there's a pretty good chance this is going to blow your mind as to why they're so difficult, is that when you are setting a boundary, you have to be bold enough to cause an outer conflict instead of an inner conflict. I'm going to say that again. You have to be bold enough to cause an outer conflict instead of an inner conflict. When we say yes to, let's say, giving up our time, we've chosen to, the inner conflict that we feel is resentment, anger, disappointment, shame. So that saying yes and foregoing our boundary causes an inner conflict. And we choose that over the outer conflict of our perception of letting someone down or their reaction to us saying no. So we instead heap shame, heap guilt, resentment, anger, disappointment, fear, everything we heap on ourselves because we decide, and we are not emotionally literate enough to actually just sit with the ick of that person maybe upset that we said no to doing that thing. But you know what? The more you learn to honor yourself and say, I'm going to sit in the ick of that person may be disappointed that I can't join their whatever. Okay, well, I'm not responsible for how someone else thinks, acts, and behaves. So it's not my problem. I can sit with the disappointment. There might be some things I can do to mitigate that. However, there's a beauty in saying, I'm going to honor myself. I'm going to honor my values. I'm going to honor my time, my energy, and I'm going to not cause an inner conflict. And I'm going to be strong enough and bold enough to step into a potential external conflict, knowing that I can hold myself, knowing that it doesn't mean anything about me, and knowing I'm going to be okay. And that is what we have not been taught to do, is be resourced well to step into conflict, because that's what people pleasers hate. They hate conflict above anything else. And you know that if you have that immediate sense of dread after somebody has asked you to breach a boundary, and you've usually happily gone, there's my boundaries, gone, sure. And you had that immediate feeling of dread of, oh, I've just said yes to this one more thing and I don't have the time. And now I'm going to come home and I have to do it on the couch or on the weekend and I'm grumpy. And what does this mean about me? And I'm failing in everything. We've sat with all of that and inflicted upon ourselves instead of taking the braver path. As we start to put these in place, as we learn to disappoint others because we're not responsible for that, there's this beautiful sense of freedom that magically starts to unlock. Our resentment dissolves. We now have far more time and energy for what actually matters because we're not simmering in resentment and anger and frustration and guilt and shame, which we just compound and heap and heap and heap and heap. And that's why we feel so heavy. Instead, we have this beautiful opportunity to decide what matters, to know where we end and where others begin, and walk through life much more boundary with much greater intention. And that's when everything starts to shift. From the moment you start doing this, you sense this liberation and freedom. And that's what I want for you. Now, the reason boundaries are more important than ever for you to uphold right now is because of this work situation where so many people now have moved into a hybrid work environment. And by this, I mean perhaps several days in the office, several days at home, in whatever capacity you are working. We got used to life in a typically work from home world over the last couple of years with COVID and everything in between. And now with often mandated return to the offices, we are now in this world that was sort of built for offices. And then we had to all very suddenly adjust to doing everything from home and everything remotely. And we've never really mastered this hybrid world of being able to go into the office and be social and put on real shoes and and go and have coffees from people. And maybe there's a commute usually involved in that process. But we've got this crazy belief that I'm going to get as much work done in the office as I am when I'm working from home, which just doesn't happen. And so without the ability to boundary your energy and your time, and what we're seeing is with the increase now in commute times, because people are going back into the office, the thing that's falling off is time for themselves. Exercise, time with friends, time just to chill or to read a book or do something that you want is the thing that's falling off, because now you've got this added pressure of a hybrid lifestyle. And so if you don't know how to hold boundaries, then you are going to come undone very, very fast. And I talk to thousands of women every year, and I can tell you a very strong theme that is emerging in this first half of 2024 is all about the added pressure that this hybrid lifestyle is putting on personal lives, is putting on health, is putting on sleep, and everything in between. We think about the logistics of, all right, I'm going back into the office 3 days, or I'm upping a day in the office, or whatever it might be. But we never actually take the time to think about, all right, what boundaries now do I need to put in place? What boundaries about my commute time? What boundaries about my relationships or my time for me or my health? Because these aren't part of our vernacular. These aren't part of our language. And it is to our detriment. This has become such an issue that I am incorporating an entire day on boundaries in my live virtual event that will be launching in May. All the details will be below this, but I invite you to register now and to come along, where I'm going to be talking about this, the 2024, how to master the dynamics of burnout to balance in 2024. I do not want you to fall victim to a lot of these trends that we are seeing, and hybrid work and lack of boundaries are absolutely one of them. So in this workshop, I'm going to give you specific strategy and mindset shifts that are going to empower you to set better boundaries between all walks of life. I want you to unlock this freedom that comes with holding boundaries, with protecting your energy, with knowing where you end, what you want, what your desires are. We can start to do that for you, and then everything starts to shift. You become your best self. Everybody else gets the best of you. And who wouldn't want that? So grab the link below, come to Burnout to Balance. Let's help you master 2024's new dynamics. And I look forward to seeing you there. Thanks for joining us today on the Balance and Beyond podcast. We're so glad you carved out this time for yourself. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend who might need to hear this today. And if you're feeling extra generous, leaving us a review on your podcast platform of choice would mean the world to us. If you're keen to dive deeper into our world, visit balance.It.com to discover more about the toolkit that has helped thousands of women avoid burnout and create a life of balance and beyond. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on the Balance and Beyond podcast.